It is his poll numbers, absolutely.
What is the deal with this gift room?
I mean, how many times have you heard him say that?
Tens of thousands of dollars on hair and makeup.
He's run into that brick wall.
He called them disloyal.
We've heard a lot about his relationship with the governor.
I don't know if that's the answer.
Welcome to The Takeaway. I'm Alex Maragos. In every episode here, we are trying to have approachable conversations with expert journalists about the biggest stories in Chicago and beyond. And if you've seen an episode before, you might know the rules. We're going for three things: what we know, how we know that, and really why it matters to you. And for this episode, we're talking about a story that's very big in Chicago right now. That is Mayor Brandon Johnson. He is at the halfway point now of his first term. Back on April 4th of 2023, he won in a runoff against Paul Vallas and became the 57th mayor of Chicago. And now we're 2 years in. We've got 2 years to go. So we thought it's a good time to check in on the mayor's performance. And with me today, our guests are two people who I believe the mayor would rather not see in the briefing room when he walks in to answer questions. We have Marianne Ahern and Rose Schmidt, the NBC5 political reporter and our political producer as well. These are people who just love politics, who eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. I have to sometimes focus on different stories here or there. This is their beat, and we're so glad to have you both here. Thanks for joining The Takeaway.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us come.
All right, so we are halfway in, 2 down, 2 to go. I want to talk about, I know people have a lot of opinions about Brandon Johnson. How do you think, Marianne, first to you, most people would rate his performance 2 years in?
It has been difficult. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It has been very difficult. And here we are at the 2-year mark. You would think at this point we might be making a turn. He is polling at less than 10%. That's really unusual. Even in Rod Blagojevich's worst days, he was at about 15%. That's going to be difficult for him to run again. And I think so many are saying, wait a minute, I thought he was going to be completely different than Lori Lightfoot. She had a difficult time. Now we have even more. Is there such a thing as more difficult? It's one thing to campaign. It's another to govern. And he's run into that brick wall.
He had some consistent talking points on the campaign that he seems to have stuck to so far in the governing phase of things. I think every relative political newcomer, and yes, he was a Cook County commissioner, but he doesn't have a long history in politics. Every newcomer is going to stumble a little bit with the governing aspect. But Rose, you've been in the room so many times where he's asked a specific question and he reverts back to some talking points. What do you think that's done for his ability to get things done and build a coalition around things that he wants to do?
Well, I can tell you it's really difficult for us to do our job sometimes when, you ask him a question and he has, say, 3 or 4 talking points that we've heard him say so many times. He says, stronger, safer Chicago. I mean, how many times have you heard him say that? And I think because of that, we walk in and we're turning a specific story on a specific topic. And when his answer doesn't necessarily sort of help us in our quest, our quest to finish the story, it makes it difficult. I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, we were at a press conference and asking him about FDA cuts that were made by the Trump administration and wanting to ask him specifically how those cuts would affect Chicagoans. And I asked him the question, and his answer was starting to talk about the January 6th defendants who were pardoned. And I was kind of like, okay.
All right.
And eventually I think he got there in a roundabout way, but I think I'm still wondering how FDA cuts left people in Chicago.
Yes. The reason why I bring that up now is because there was a recent incident where I think we saw another example of that. And that was the teen takeover that was in Streeterville, the second one in March where someone was shot. Brandon Johnson came out and said, we need more safe spaces for these teenagers. I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
Right.
But you're the mayor, and there seems to, at least so far, been a lack of a clear, detailed plan about how these are going to get any better. Have you seen him, what have you seen from the administration in terms of not coming up with a clear plan where there needs to be one? And the takeovers happened in the Lightfoot administration as well, but they're not slowing down, is the point.
And she agreed to it. She agreed to the curfew, which was unusual for a mayor to have to go that where.
And he's resisted a call to move it up to 8 o'clock.
He has, and says, oh, we're only going to move the problem to another neighborhood. I don't know if that's the answer. He attended an event at Navy Pier the day after that teen takeover, and it was in the middle of the day, which is great. I mean, have events whenever, but that's not the time period that people are concerned about.
Right.
What about having a program for kids in that difficult 6 to 10 period where people want to say, wait a minute, why are there 500 kids outside our doors here of NBC?
The nights and weekends issue, I think, is what everybody wants to see addressed. Rose, do you have anything related?
Well, I was just going to say, when you ask him about it, he sort of pivots to conversations about summer jobs and other things that I think, he would like to see teens doing in a productive way, but not necessarily answering the question of, at night, to your point.
It may not get solved overnight. I think most voters would understand that, but it's the fact that we haven't seen an outline of here's what I'm going to do. And I think that reflects some other issues where he's had a bold vision. We saw that during the campaign. He says he's got a vision for what he wants to do. I just haven't seen that translate many times into actionable policy.
And I do think it would be difficult to enforce an 8 p.m. curfew. That would be difficult for police. How many of them are going to do it? But they did seem at the same time to be sort of standing around watching that their hands were tied as well, that they couldn't tell these kids, get out of here. There's too many of you hanging around here.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough situation that they're going to need to come up with a comprehensive strategy to fix. Big news that we just got this week is the CTU CPS contract that appears to be done. They're actually voting on it right now. And a big thorny issue during the campaign was Mayor Johnson is a member of CTU, but he's negotiating kind of on behalf of CPS if he's the mayor. So we've got this deal, Marianne. How did it all shake out with where the deal points eventually came down to, what everybody got? And then how do you think the mayor is being viewed, considering it took 11 months to get this deal?
Right. I think very mixed results. From what I'm reading, this is the offer that they were given in the fall. And it took them another 4 months or 5 months to finally agree to it.
Oh, wow.
So the CTU wanted 9% raises. According to CPS Pedro Martinez, the ask was more than $10 billion. Now, of course, any negotiation, you buy a house, you go for this, or you as the seller, you're hoping for this, and you know that that's not. But in the end, it's rather than $10 billion, the payout is going to be 1.5. They have the money for the first year, then they're not sure how, but that's another topic. Yeah. But as far as the mayor who was brought to the dance by the CTU and SEIU did not necessarily deliver a rosier picture for them. Yes, they got 10 minutes extra prep time, elementary school teachers. Yes, there's more librarians. It wasn't an awful contract. It just wasn't it ended up, they were so divided at the end. I think there was so much bad will that it's going to take some time for people to say whether or not this was a contract that he's going to wave in the air and say, you want me to be, your candidate again in 2 years.
They did avoid a strike, though.
Well, so that I was just going to ask about that. That seems like that seems like a low bar to clear. Hey, we didn't have a strike in 15 years. It's like, did we need to really celebrate
Imagine
that?
how bad it would have looked, though, if they did have if it reached that point.
Well, they would have had a strike. They did it to Ron. They did it to Mayor Emanuel. They did it to Mayor Lightfoot, right?
Yeah, they did it both. I want to talk, Rose, so you both are asking something of the administration pretty much every day. You need answers to this or you need something like that. Let's talk about the people around Brandon Johnson, because I feel like everybody kind of has their opinion on Brandon Johnson, but they may not know the staff and the help and all of the people that go into the administration and make it work in every administration. What have you taken away from the staff he has around him and the turnover of those people?
Well, Marianne has been asked, I've heard her say it at forums, what's the difference between this mayor and previous mayors you've covered? What do you say?
It is the team. It's the team. Whether or not you've got the A team, the B team, I'm not even quite sure what grade to give them. Incomplete at this point.
The turnover?
Right. Oh, the turnover and the non-responsiveness, and I get it. We're obviously not the only two asking questions. But to come back to us, their former communications director would come back to us at 7 p.m.
If he responded.
If he even responded.
Yeah.
You'd ask at 9 a.m. and you'd get an answer maybe at 7 or 2 days later.
Yeah.
That was odd.
Yeah.
Comparing it to the governor's team, their team is way more. They're way with it.
Right. Politics aside, they get you answers.
Yeah.
And so Mayor Johnson made headlines about 2 months ago now, and he talked about how he wished that he had cleaned house sooner. Those are his words. Basically, he was saying that there were holdovers from previous mayoral administrations, and he wished that day one he had walked in and sort of gotten rid of those department heads. He called them disloyal, and then we saw a few people leave, very quickly after that.
What I find a little bit surprising about that is, yes, every administration has the right to put in people who they want, but most people would say the chasm of political belief between Lightfoot and Johnson didn't appear to be that big. They're both Democrats, they're both progressives, but maybe are we seeing how far to the left Johnson is on some of these issues? I mean, I think first when it was announced that somebody was running to the left of Lightfoot, you say, wow, that's pretty progressive. That must be out there.
Right. And for him, let's choose Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa,
Okay.
who has had a very dicey time in the city council in the last year. He had an argument with a fellow councilwoman, it was attacked himself. I mean, then the council
Blocked her from going in.
Yes, blocked her from going in. And then the rest of the council said, we want you to be reprimanded. There was this whole issue. Well, he was taken away from his chairmanship, but now he's rewarded to be the head of the Park District. Huge job in Chicago. It's one of the jewels of Chicago, the Park District. The programs, the camps, the events that take place. And we're going to have someone who never has done anything like that in the past, or maybe I'm wrong, but I've never heard of any big affinity for the park programs. If that was really his rallying cry in council, that would be a different story. We'd say, oh, you know what? That was something he worked on that. And boy, isn't that, but it's so you think, all right, he's found a way to reward one of his allies. Don't we call that the Peter Principle? I think that's what it's called, right? We're voted up.
Right.
I also think, when you look at how divided, I mean, it's almost evenly split down the middle of the council. He's had to break the tie 3 different votes in council over the last, I think it's 19 or 20 months or so. So, in his two years so far, he's had to cast a vote 3 different times to break the tie because the 50 aldermen are split down the middle.
Yeah. And I think that you may be happy if you don't agree with Brandon Johnson, or you may be surprised negatively if you do agree with Brandon Johnson. When he got elected, a third of the council was turned over, mostly aligned with his policies to a large degree. These were people a little bit to the left or a lot more to the left. And so the fact that not a lot has actually gotten done through council, I think would surprise a lot of people 2 years in that he can't claim a lot of big legislative victories through the council.
And just to give him, because it sounds like I'm constantly on him, but to give him a bit of a break, it is post-COVID. It's a very difficult time. The federal money has run out. There's no more of that. And yet the economy has not necessarily gotten us back to where people would like to be. And if any of you, I'm sure you have walked down Michigan Avenue or the Loop, State Street, you see the empty storefronts. And that's a huge challenge for him. And it also begs the question of where are you on businesses? Where's your agenda there? Is your agenda only for the unions? I think there needs to be a bit more of a balance.
Okay, what is the deal with this gift room? A lot of secrecy, and then you got in.
Right. Well, first of all, the Inspector General, it all came from her, who said she wanted to come and see, not her inspectors wanted to come, her investigators, to look at the gift room and wanted to see if they kept any records of what was given to the mayor and where did they store it. And they were like, no. And there was this sort of 6-8 month battle over, and finally she just said, okay, I'm going to make public that there's this gift room that you won't let me in. And so that's whenever we found out there was such a thing.
So every mayor has one, and it's not gifts for Brandon. It's gifts given to Brandon really for the city. Everything belongs to the city. But the secrecy and the we're not going to let you in was the weird part, right, Rose?
Well, I think, that was the sort of ongoing battle that we had, because the day that the Inspector General's report was released, there was actually a news conference scheduled already with the mayor. So we were like, oh, perfect. We can go ask him about it. And I think it was Charlie, one of our other reporters, who ended up asking. And so there was a back and forth sort of about, is this report accurate? What's your response to it? And he sort of flat out denied that there was any wrongdoing at all, from his staff and his administration. And I think then it sort of became this saga because he told us, oh, well, anybody can go in there. Reporters can go in there. Journalists can go in there. Great.
Hey, let's do it.
So we're like, all right, sign us up. Let us
Sign
know
us up.
our time slot, you know, when we can go in there. And then I believe it was over a month from, no, it wasn't more than a month after that, because I put in like an official request, and then I put in like another official request,
Yeah.
and then I said something to his staff. And so like by the time we actually got in there, you know, it was,
They tried to give us 30 seconds or so or a minute of video thinking that was going to be enough.
yeah, they posted it online.
Yes.
22 seconds.
Here's some video. This is what it looks like. And we said, no. We want to come and see it for ourselves.
What's the big deal? I don't get it.
Yes.
I don't get it.
Yes,
What's the
that's
big deal?
another example of stepping on himself.
Okay.
You know, it's always, you know, sort of the explanation would have it's worse than
Yeah.
cover-ups.
Yeah, and then the
Wrong.
It wasn't even, it wasn't necessarily even about what was in the room, because, you know, there was some Kate Spade purses.
I was
a
gonna say, so
Buffalo
what is it?
pen.
What is it? What's in it?
There was the tracksuit that he wore, or the fire suit that he wore for the NASCAR
NASCAR.
last summer.
There's liquor.
Yeah.
There were some holdovers, I'm sure, from previous administrations.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of T-shirts.
But it wasn't necessarily even about the gifts that he
Right.
and the city had received. It was more about the fact that we were told we were allowed to go in there, and then
And then
we didn't get to, and so we wondered about it. And finally, you know, when you finally got the call that we could go in there, we had like an hour's notice to be at City Hall to go come in the gift
on
room.
over.
You were working on another story. It became interesting.
And another thing that caught a lot of people by surprise was the spending, I don't have the exact number in front of me, tens of thousands of dollars on hair and makeup. This was a campaign expense, so not city funds. But people were caught off guard, I think, by the amount used for that purpose.
Well, if it were a woman, I think people would have probably said, oh, wow, that's crazy. Don't you remember? Maybe not. But John Edwards he ran for
$400 haircut. I remember.
Oh, yeah, very good.
Didn't work out for him, though.
It didn't work out.
Yeah.
I mean, $30,000 on hair and makeup is really interesting. And
What was
we
the
wonder
explanation?
if others on his team
Okay.
might also be benefiting from that. Now, it's his campaign money, which he's allowed to spend. But yeah, we've not had a real good explanation.
So it's all legal, it's just very strange.
And I will say, when we do see him, he does generally look very put together. You know, it's clear that his appearance is, you know, it matters to him. And I think when you see that amount that he's spent on it, of money that he's allowed to spend, right, for that purpose, his argument is, I could be campaigning all the time. I'm mayor all the time, you know, and I think we kind of see that.
And something we're hearing a lot right now is, now we start to look ahead, is where is his relationship with different people and different factions, right? Is it beyond just the union? So I want to ask, we've heard a lot about his relationship with the governor. Not a great start. Let's just put it that way. Because you hear from Democrats, we need to work together to challenge and
Yes.
fight back from what President Trump is presenting to Illinois and Chicago. No matter how you feel about that, that's just what the Democrats are saying. Is that relationship salvageable, room for improvement? How do you think that's going to go?
Well, you know what sticks out to me is that Governor Pritzker did not criticize him at all. I mean, up until recently, he was very much like, you know, I'm doing my job, he's doing his, but you also didn't really see them, you know, side by side a whole lot.
They're not buddies.
No.
You never thought they were buddies.
But that sort of changed recently with the hemp legislation.
Yes, this hemp legislation that Pritzker would like to have more guidelines.
Yeah.
The mayor took the opposite side and worked some of this Black caucus and said, don't vote for this. Pritzker, even in interviews with us, said, I don't go into his house. I wouldn't do anything like that to him. I mean, he was not happy. You know, Pritzker and Lightfoot had a contentious relationship somewhat during COVID. The mayor and the governor, it's kind of one of those things, even if they're from the same party, this is not necessarily new.
Right.
Emmanuel, you know, he was buddies with Rauner and privately, but they didn't get along when they were both in charge. But yes, the mayor and Pritzker, I'm not sure that can be repaired.
And it's also at a time when, like you mentioned it, Marianne, the COVID money's running out. We just had this nasty budget fight in Chicago. The budget has never been an easy thing to do in Chicago. I can't remember a budget fight that went really well. We got skyways that belong to private entities and parking meters that do now. So we know how that goes. But it doesn't portend a smooth future here when there's infighting in the council, infighting with the mayor, and fighting with Governor Pritzker. Those entities need to work together.
And Chicago's so used to strong mayor, weak council.
Yeah.
And it's really flipped. And he would say that's what he always ran on, that he wanted to be collaborative, that he wanted everybody to have a say. But I do think it leaves some Chicagoans in a state of who's in charge. Is he in charge or is he not in charge?
Yeah. Speaking of being in charge or wanting to be in charge. So 2 years down, 2 to go. Politicians are never short on ambition. So I want to talk about names that people may want to see, or candidates who think they want to be in it, who think they should be mayor. Throw out some names in maybe discussions you've had. I don't know how much you can share or can't share with people who you think might want to be mayor if they sense, for lack of a better term, blood in the water.
You have to start with Alexi Janulius, the Secretary of State. Definitely thinking about it. And then also right there thinking about it as well, Susana Mendoza. They are openly critical of the mayor, which is their way of saying, hey, I've got a different idea. Now a new name, City Clerk Ana Valencia. She ran for the Secretary of State, did not win in the primary. Janulius did. She apparently is also sort of eyeing what else she would like to do. There is, people want to say, what about Paul Vallas? Could he do it again? I don't think Vallas is ready to say no, never, but others are saying you've run before, it didn't work, you ran twice, you also ran for governor. I'm not sure that that's the right fit for him, but who is going to fill that hole?
Well, and some of the other names, some of the names that you just mentioned who are not Paul Vallas are currently elected officials they are current Democrats. So the argument that Brandon Johnson had, whether you think it's fair or not, that Paul Vallas was a Republican and he was this and he was MAGA and all that, Brandon Johnson could not potentially make that argument against any of these people who are sitting Democrats.
Right.
Yeah.
It is staggering, though, how many people you're already seeing step up to the plate this early on.
That's what I was going to say. So is there, Marianne, I'll lean on your decades of experience here especially, is that a function of weakness from Brandon Johnson? Is that a function of our just current political climate where it seems like there's any time is election time, where you can campaign 365 days a year? Now, nobody said they're actually jumping in yet. But
Right.
What do you think that's a function of?
It is his poll numbers, absolutely. When he's polling below 10%, that has others looking at it and saying, why not? And it also leads to why the council is being more vocal, because they don't see him as a threat, that he doesn't have the political power.
The amount of people who responded when you posted on social media about the possibility that Janulius could run, I mean, immediately it took off, this tweet that she made. And so I think that was an indication.
2 million, I believe.
People were
crazy.
Oh,
yes,
wow.
People were thinking about this clearly. And, are they looking for change? They're seeing what's happening at City Hall now and wondering, are there other people who should be in there instead or could be?
What do you think should be the path forward? What would be a way to at least improve some of the things that have gone wrong for Brandon Johnson? I mean, I'm not here to make this episode about the list of things he's done wrong and the list of things he's done right. There's plenty of stories. Go ahead. They're all cataloged on the internet of things that you could see that he has done or has not done.
We should talk about his congressional hearing, because I do think that went well and maybe could be an indication of, sort of, he didn't take the bait, right? He went to Washington and he was grilled by Republican lawmakers and he held his own. He was able to sit there and say, I got this, and appeared calm under pressure. And I think that's sort of maybe what people need more of is that like leadership, especially against people in Washington. And I also think visibility too.
He did his homework, and thank God he did, because but at the same time, he was prepped for at least 3 days by a very expensive law firm in Washington, D.C. And he stuck to the script and he didn't buckle. Boston's mayor seemed to me more genuine and was able to answer.
Chicago native,
Barrington, yep. And was able to answer the questions very genuinely. And yet, I do not take away from the mayor. It had to be difficult to have 5, 6, 7 people attack you personally.
And looking for viral moments that they wanted to create,
It's very much theater. It's never fun. I don't care what your political beliefs are. That doesn't look like a fun room to walk into for anybody. But I would describe that as steady. That's the word I would probably use from how it came out. So the people who maybe don't live in Chicago who are going to see this episode, why should they care? Why should, okay, Chicago, they got their problems. It's the same as always been, whatever they might say. Why should people outside Chicago care about the performance of Brandon Johnson and want to pay attention to what's going on here?
Well, big cities, I grew up in a small town, but, big cities really are an economic engine for all of the United States. I mean, we are the pocket here of the Midwest, the transportation hub, our lakefront, the resources. I mean, we have just so many things going on at the same time, economically, environmentally. So politically, got to do Meet the Press, which was the coolest thing in this.
I remember.
And I said then, Broadway, New York has Broadway, LA has Hollywood, Chicago has politics.
Yeah.
And, we divide over it. We, yell at each other and don't get along and worry about, but this is where things percolate and happen. And so, yes, maybe you don't live right here in the city, but you should care about us and other major cities, not, of how well we're doing is a reflection on the American economy and the American spirit.
I would ask this question if it were any mayor, but because we're at this point in the term. Lightfoot's big challenge was COVID. The first half, I would argue, the big challenge of the Johnson administration was migrants. It was some of Lightfoot administration, but really that was the big challenge, I would say, of the first 2 years. What do you think the next 2 years, the big challenge would be for anybody who would be in office right now? If you could look ahead and say, this is the thing of things we might be able to predict that he's going to have to tackle.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump and what to do with what happens as far as federal funding that cities rely on. And where do they then find those funds? And will more of these cuts that have already started, that's going to have a trickle-down effect to not just Chicago, but to Evanston and Manteno and wherever you live. So yes, how will they deal with the Republican administration?
And because Chicago is a sanctuary city, President Trump has put a target on the city.
A lawsuit
yes.
from the AG.
And then, and perhaps cutting back on even more funding as a punishment, not just the cut back of, hey, we've been living too high on the hog. It's, oh, you're a sanctuary city, so you're even going to get cut back more.
So, Rose, how has Johnson postured himself to the 2-ish months that we've had so far of the Trump administration threats and the Trump administration, lawsuits and stuff like that? How has Brandon Johnson, at least so far, tried to push back on some of that?
I think he's really strong on education. When you ask him about Trump administration policies, he continually pushes back to education because, he has the CTU background. He has a master's in education. So I think when you ask him about Department of Ed cuts, for example, he sort of has an answer ready to go on that. I think some of the other areas he maybe has struggled more to, fight back immediately. But we also, we saw him be a surrogate for Kamala Harris's campaign. And I think he's tried to, put himself on that national stage, but I don't know how successful he's been. You could go back to his lack of a role essentially at the DNC and talk about the impact kind of that made.
That was a Pritzker decision.
Yeah.
I mean, that Pritzker wanted to, it was his baby, and he wasn't about to share it with anybody else.
Raise the money, and he was front and center in that shot, the Illinois delegation, yada, yada, yada from there.
And I think, just these last 2 months, I think Democrats across the board have really struggled to keep up. The flood the zone has been a very successful strategy from the GOP. And I think, Mayor Johnson has he fallen into that? I think you maybe could argue that too.
You brought up the education point, and I wanted to ask you with the CTU deal that was just reached. Is Mayor Johnson a former member of CTU? Is he a member on leave? What I'm getting at here is, does he stand to potentially benefit?
We have asked so many.
Anything in that deal? Okay, you've
Marianne
asked.
has tried.
We've asked.
We
so
actually
many
had
ways.
a very contentious press conference when he announced the new school board members.
Right.
And that was the question that you asked. And then I asked also afterward. And I'm not sure it was answered.
And then we had Iris ask as well from Telemundo.
Yeah.
I mean, all at this because he wouldn't answer directly. Because there is a belief that, yes, he is a CTU member on leave that will benefit one day from the contract.
From the pensions,
Yes.
especially whatever is ultimately decided. And you still haven't gotten an answer.
Not have a firm answer on that.
No, and you've asked his staff too as well to clarify.
Yes.
Especially in a city like this where we talk about corruption all the time. And I'm not accusing the mayor of anything here. But when it appears that you could maybe potentially benefit from something that you negotiated on behalf of the city, that just doesn't seem like a good look.
Well, what's interesting about that is I feel like we as journalists have actually had to change the ways in which we ask questions in order to elicit a response from him. Because if you ask him a question, he doesn't necessarily answer it. So it's like, sometimes you have to be like, yes or no, Mr. Mayor, are you still a member of CTU? And try to get that yes or no.
And especially because that is a pretty straightforward question. Are you or are you not? And so, okay, that non-answer, I guess, is the answer that I'm going to get.
Right.
Yet to receive one. All right, we're 2 years in, 2 to go. You've covered a lot of mayors, and now here you are 2 years into Mayor Johnson. I want to ask you, so far, what is your takeaway, Marianne, from the first 2 years and with 2 years left in this term?
He has not learned from rookie mistakes. And I do think that the learning curve has been so tough. Partly, he steps in his own way, and his staff has not been as helpful as he could have. And now we've gone, I've witnessed the end of the Daley years, the Rahm Emanuel, Lightfoot. So, Daley, of course, had a professional team. Rahm Emanuel brought a lot of young people from the White House who worked with Obama, whatever, came with him. Lightfoot struggled as well with her staff at first. This has been the most difficult struggle to just, as we've reiterated so many times here, about simple questions and answers to the point where they will say, hey, well, maybe I've asked a question on a Friday afternoon. No answer all weekend. No, and I work all the time. I mean, I
Yes,
can't
you
help
do.
myself. But, I ask on Saturday, hey, did you get my question? Hey, on Sunday, I'm still looking for that answer. Finally, on Monday afternoon at maybe 3 o'clock, oh, I was out of pocket for the weekend. That's, to me, not believable. If you
He's the
were-
mayor 7 days a week,
Heck,
so
You're right. And you're the press secretary to the mayor of the city of Chicago, and you don't have an answer. Just say, I don't have that answer. I'll get it when I'll try to find it for you Monday.
And it's not just that. I mean, he went weeks without having any public events, or very few. And, the amount of times that we've tried to get him in front of a camera to answer a question has been difficult too. There's been times where you'll ask a question, and then, or all the other reporters will, and then you won't be able to get to you. And then they'll say, well, we have another press conference next Tuesday. And it's like you're counting on, how many days are between now, Wednesday, and next Tuesday. And you're like, oh, that's a long time. How much news could happen between now and then? And then you're asking about things that happened 2 weeks ago. Right. It's a struggle.
So is that your takeaway, that it's a struggle? Give me your takeaway, Rose. 2 years down, halfway point, 2 to go. What's your takeaway so far?
I think, we saw him really struggle to pass the budget in December of last year. And so I think that was sort of an indication that, either he could change and try to make things more collaborative, and then it would make this year easier, or it could happen the opposite way. And I think we're still waiting to find out, since then.
And I wonder, you've covered mayors in 3 other cities. How does it compare?
I would say, especially I think back to my time in Milwaukee, and the mayor there was almost always available. There was a shooting and he'd be in front of the camera talking about it. Things that would happen at City Hall. And that visibility was not only super helpful to us doing our jobs, but also to the people of the city who are waiting to hear a response about
Most
something.
importantly, the
Yes.
people who he
Yes.
works for.
And I think there's this maybe a lack of awareness that we're not there because we want to be, or that we have these burning questions that we need answered. No, we're there on behalf of people who watch our station, who read our website, who see Marianne's tweets because she has such a great presence online. I think that's the lack of awareness, is that we're not doing this for ourselves, right?
Right. No, my favorite line is, we represent the people's right to know. And that's what it's all about.
And so when you do have to chase down sometimes the mayor for things, we do mean that literally occasionally. This video of him running from you
Mr. Mayor,
and
will you please
and other
wait?
reporters.
Mr. Mayor.
What's your reaction to that
Mr.
moment?
Mayor,
That
why
was
do you
this
have
was
to run
over a
from
year
us?
ago.
Why do you have to run
Yes.
from us, Mr. Mayor?
Well, the interesting part was I had a new hip, so I wasn't quite sure that I could run. And and he's not the only person I've ever
That's
chased.
true. You've had to chase some other mayors and some other
I've chased them.
politicians.
Yes, I've even chased them through the Hyatt cafeteria, wherever.
I wish I was there for that. Come on.
But that one, especially after it happened, I mean, you're just you say, wait a second, he's going where? He's going
Yeah.
out the back door. We're here to ask him.
And this was an outdoor event. There was no
Yes.
back door. It was a park.
They took him around the back to the alley rather than just walking out where they had dropped him off.
What were you trying to ask him? Do you remember what the story was?
I don't even remember. It was a question. It was something. There was a police tie to it. I don't know if there had been a police shooting of some kind. And so we were trying to find out why he wasn't talking about it, what had happened. He was not giving any kind of answers to it. And it had been a couple of days. It had been a couple of days and people were trying to get to, we thought, oh, and when they saw us show up, they said, oh, he's not taking questions today. And I said, oh, okay. We'll see, we'll see about, I mean, what do you
You
mean?
can't ask them.
He's not asking, what do you mean?
They should have seen at least you coming in terms of wanting to ask questions. They may not have seen you coming literally at them to chase them down.
Right. I did send that clip to my surgeon who did my hip. I said, you can't, I said, you cannot use this in an ad. However, I guess I'm doing better.
Well, let's hope that there's none of that in the 2 years ahead and that you won't have to chase anybody down. Rose, Marianne, thank you so much for joining the Takeaway. Really great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Alex.
Thanks.
That was a really interesting conversation with Marianne and Rose. I could talk about politics with them all day long. They have so much experience. Marianne's been here over 30 years, covered 4 Chicago mayors. Rose has covered 3 different mayors in her career and is talking to this administration almost every day, trying to get questions answered. And so it was really interesting to hear what has gone right, what's gone wrong, and where we are 2 years in at this check-in point halfway through. Here's my takeaway. The strategy for Brandon Johnson, if he wants to have success in the back half, has to change. And that's not a radical idea. We've seen all the turnover on his staff. We've seen the losses that have come legislatively, policy-wise, as Mayor Johnson struggles to adapt from campaign mode to governing mode 2 years later. Every candidate struggles with it. It seems that Mayor Johnson, at least so far, hasn't found the right mix of people on his staff and people in council to ally with to get things done. Chicago has some challenges in front of it. No matter where you stand politically, it's going to be a tough time in the next 2 years to figure out how to get things done with the budget, with the challenges politically from the Trump administration that Democrats are going to face here. The next 2 years are going to be very decisive to see how Chicago goes forward as a city. So that's my takeaway, and I want to hear yours. Leave them in the comments. Would love to read them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that conversation, here are some other episodes of The Takeaway, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to listen on the go, check us out on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.